Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this CSPC pre-conference session, which is being made available to us through a virtual presentation. The title of it is Social Pharmaceutical Innovation Made in Canada Solutions to Address Unmet Medical Needs for Advanced Therapeutics. My name is Durham. I'm especially delighted to have the opportunity to chair this session because we know that the advanced therapeutics that we're talking about, many of them are being developed, made available for patients, families living with rare diseases. This is going to be an interactive discussion. We have a number of experts who are with us from across a number of expertise, which I think is going to really lead to some very lively discussions. Just to say in advance, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. I'd like to we acknowledge the land we're on, are the diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for generations. We acknowledge that in Canada, across Turtle Island, there are also 630 nations, communities, and 11 treaties we honor and share stewardship of the land with, along with unceded territories in which we all live, play, and work today. So with that, I'd like to also turn now to this session, and the format is going to be, as we say, to have a interactive panel discussion with a number of experts. For me, this is a really important opportunity because we are very concerned with regard to innovative advanced therapeutics for rare diseases. And it comes at a very timely opportunity for us. As many may know, there are more than 6,000, 7,000, perhaps even up to 8,000 rare diseases across the globe. And despite the huge advances that have been made in terms of research and development for rare diseases, especially with some of the incentives that have been put forth by the US FDA and by the European Medicines Agency, by the EU, even today, with more than 600, close to 700 rare disease therapies that have been developed, there are therapies available for only about 5, maybe perhaps up to 6% of rare diseases. Even more distressing is that many of these therapies are not yet available to most patients. One estimate has been that even in the very best countries where there is good systems, where there are good access, only about 10% for a rare disease therapy actually do get access to that therapy. Even more distressing is the fact that in many, many environments, what we do know is that most of these are not even available in terms of low and middle income countries. So we have a long ways to go in order to get access to these therapies. And certainly we have a long way to go in order to develop more therapies. So this panel, as I say, comes at a very opportune time because it introduces what I think is a very exciting direction in terms of rare disease development, but also rare disease access. I also think it's very exciting because we're talking about it from the point of view of a systems perspective, recognizing that the barriers in terms of research and development, in terms of approval of these therapies, both from a regulatory perspective and from a access perspective, oftentimes are embedded in the systems that we have, certainly in Canada, but also in other countries, and sometimes even in terms of the global systems that we use in order to approve therapy. So I think this is a very appropriate opportunity to look at what do we need to do in some of the system changes in order to make sure that we've got more therapies available and that we've got these therapies that are available to the patients who need them. Some of you may know is that in Canada, we have at the promise from the federal government made in 2019 to introduce a national rare disease drug strategy. And the government made it with a commitment of $1 billion to launch this strategy. We're very excited about it, of course. We've been in consultation, certainly led by the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders over the last 2.5, 3 years in order to propose what we would feel would be a system that would allow us to accelerate this access, not only to in a timely way, but also in an appropriate way. Those of you who may have been involved with us know that we are really proposing not so much a system for bringing and making drugs available, but a proposal that involves investment in an infrastructure so that we can do a better job in terms of diagnosing patients in a timely fashion, getting accurate diagnosis, that we're proposing a system that would involve centers of excellence so that we have specialists who are able to identify and to treat patients, and that the system is set up in such a way through our centers of excellence that they are linked to local community providers, that they are available in order to provide the consultation. So our goal is that every patient with a rare disorder, every family would actually have access to a specialist regardless of where they live. Even more pertinent to what we're talking about here is absolutely having changes in terms of how we collect that information in terms of patient use and patient outcomes, and that we're able to analyze to be able to optimize the availability of drugs for patients so that they're used appropriately and that we're able to determine what is the value proposition. So from our perspective, we do feel that there are whole-scale changes that need to be made, certainly in infrastructure, certainly in terms of the system. And what we do know is that currently in Canada, their contribution in terms of innovation for pharmaceutical research and development has been somewhat stymied by the fact that we do not necessarily have systems that are aligned in order to not only promote the innovation and to be able to support it, but also to bring those to the communities that need them, to bring them forth in a sustainable way. So again, I think this is a really timely opportunity to have this kind of a discussion. I'm also extremely excited because I think we're going to be talking about across the whole system, as I say, from research and development through to availability, accessibility, and the ability to manage and monitor these, which from our point of view is whole-scale changes in some of the systems that are involved in terms of regulation, value assessment, and in terms of reimbursement. I'm also particularly excited, though, and this is where I'm going to turn to our first panelist here, because I've just been introduced to something that I certainly didn't know about before, but in reading kind of what his paper is about and how he presents it, I find that it is absolutely a way of thinking about how do we bring advanced therapies not only to Canada, but to the globe. That is really innovative and quite exciting. It's called, and I think it may be Connor Douglas's own invention in terms of the name of it, is the social pharmaceutical innovation. So I'm going to turn to Connor before we go into the rest of the panelists and maybe ask him to give us a brief thumbnail understanding of what is social pharmaceutical innovation, why is it so appropriate at this time, and how is it that we're going to look at it in terms of advancing certainly the research and development of therapeutics, but also access here in Canada, but globally.
Thanks, Durhan, and thanks to Stephanie as well too for organizing this panel. As alluded to, my name is Connor Douglas. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society within the Faculty of Science at York University in Toronto. And I'm a sociologist of science, technology, health, and medicine, and the leader of an international consortium on social pharmaceutical innovation. And social pharmaceutical innovation, or SPIN, if I may, is really a response to the complex challenges associated with rare diseases and drugs for rare diseases, some of which you've just laid out, Durhan. And the position of our consortium is that the current model of pharmaceutical innovation alone, right, our current way of doing things alone, it's just not going to meet the unmet needs of rare disease patients, and certainly not at a price point that's sustainable for healthcare systems. Therefore, radical transformations are needed across the entire pharma life cycle that stand to offer alternative pathways to more treatments that are more readily accessible. So the idea here is that there is a need for alternatives, but also that there's room for alternatives particularly in rare disease research and development, and particularly in ultra rare disease research and development. And so in doing so, we draw on scholarship and activism within social innovation to help us envisage or think about what radical transformation in pharmaceutical sector, what it would look like. There isn't time here to go into defining social innovation. We can maybe talk about that in the Q&A, but fair trade, microfinancing and lending, carbon trading, I mean, these are all social innovations. And in drawing on social innovation, we understand social pharmaceutical innovation as a collaborative processes, programs, policies, procedures, or designs that involve a diverse set of actors that break with conventional pharmaceutical innovation practices for the production of safe and effective and accessible interventions that address the unmet societal needs of rare disease patients in a way that's not primarily market driven. So SPIN is a way of understanding initiatives that break with the conventional for-profit biopharmaceutical innovation process. And it's a way of envisaging what social innovation scholars call the adjacent possible of how pharmaceutical research and development can be done. Importantly, we see SPIN in terms of products or outcomes, but also in terms of processes. As such, we see SPIN taking place across the entire life cycle of pharmaceutical innovation, from research to production, development, manufacturing to regulation, coverage, and access. And as much as it is a conceptual framework for helping us understand some of the exciting initiatives that are going on, some of the exciting initiatives that we're going to be hearing about in this panel today, really SPIN is a call for action, right? To bring like-minded stakeholders together to advance alternative forms of pharmaceutical R&D that really put the patient and not profits first. And so I'm happy to share the DOI of the paper that's in the OrphanNet journal that lays out our positioning in more detail around this concept and our framework for studying these initiatives that are ongoing, which is also, again, a call to arms for collaborative research going forward. I'm also happy to pop the project's website and that you can check us out and see our blog there as well too. So that's just a bit of a very thumbnail sketch overview of what social pharmaceutical innovation, what we see social pharmaceutical innovation is.
Thank you so very much, Connor. And I'm going to encourage everybody to actually read this paper and to really digest what is in there, because it certainly helped transform my way of thinking. And I have to say, I've already stolen a couple of the concepts in other webinars that I've been in to actually put this forth, because I think one of the things you said was fabulous in it, and certainly from our perspective, is that a lot of it's based on co-creation with the users. So it isn't so much as creating products and then being able to market them to users, but it's actually co-creating with the users the systems under which they're going to be made useful to people. So, and you know, and I guess starting from the very beginning, even what we're designing and developing is done in collaboration with those who are going to be using them, and they're also designed with the idea of what the system look like in terms of which you're going to be able to uptake them. And I think this is really transformational in terms of thinking. So I'm going to move though directly to our other panelists who, from what I have been able to glean, are equally transformational in their thinking with regard to these advanced therapeutics. And I'm going to ask each one of them to provide maybe about a 5-minute or so introduction in terms of the arena in which they work, and how they're actually disrupting the systems in which they work in order to address this issue of advancing therapeutics, making them more available and accessible. I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce him or herself, and then to give us a little bit of a thumbnail of what you're doing. Maybe we'll start with Rossini.
Thank you very much. So I'm Rishini Viratna. I'm a senior research officer with the National Research Council of Canada. I'm leading the cancer immunology group here, but also very heavily involved in another program that we have initiated here at the NRC. So for people who are not so familiar with the NRC, NRC is the Government of Canada's largest research and development organization, and we have the mandate of really helping to carry out the federal policy mandates to advance scientific knowledge and also to help business innovation in Canada. So just to talk about, how we are trying to apply this spin model. So under the 2018 federal budget, the NRC was awarded an envelope of money to collaborate with academia, with clinicians, industry, to catalyze transformative, high risk, high reward research with the potential for game-changing scientific discoveries and technology breakthroughs in areas that are of high importance to Canada. So under this mandate, the Human Health Therapeutics Research Center of the NRC launched a program on cell and gene therapy with the mission of developing transformative technologies and implementing innovative collaborative models to deliver safe and more accessible and affordable cell and gene therapies to Canadians. So this is a good example of spin, I would say. The program, has sort of a two-prong approach to achieve its goal. One is to develop and implement disruptive technology solutions to tackle the complexity, the cost drivers, and bottlenecks confronting the discovery and R&D phase of cell and gene therapy innovation. And the other is to really invest in developing key ecosystem biomanufacturing capacity to address the fundamental gaps in early phase GMP production and clinical evaluation and de-risking these novel products. We are focusing on cell therapy and gene therapy. Just focusing on gene therapy, this program is really focusing on designing and producing an improved version of an AAV-based gene therapy product to treat lipopolylipase deficiency. This is a rare genetic metabolic disorder, and to offer this treatment to Canadian population affected with LPLD by enabling clinical trials in the first instance, but eventually as an affordable and accessible treatment option. So to do this, we are collaborating with multiple sectors. We are collaborating with researchers, mainly at the University of British Columbia, who were the first to develop the original gene therapy for this particular disease. It's called Glybera. We are collaborating with the clinical leaders who were involved in bringing this first version of the therapy to clinical trial. We are collaborating with Canadian CRO with experience in administering the trials and therapies for rare hyperlipidemic disorders in Quebec. They will be heavily involved in putting together the clinical trial application and monitoring and conducting the clinical trial. And then the NRC team is bringing our expertise in viral vector design, production, preclinical evaluation and imaging, as well as process development and scale up for viral vectors using NRC technologies and cell lines. And we are also partnering with the Biomanufacturing Center at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute, who have expertise in GMP production of viral-based therapies, and they will be doing the GMP production of the therapy for clinical trials. So this is really a multi-sectorial, translational collaboration, which is a very good example of SPIN. So the project will really forge innovative collaboration models, public-private, to strengthen the Canadian capacity for to build a full value chain for accessible gene therapies, including AAV vectors, clinical scale biomanufacturing, and clinical trials. Beyond the scope of the program, but considering the new GMP capacity, that is GMP biomanufacturing capacity, that is coming to NRC, this opportunity really presents itself to strategically leverage some of the capacity and all the sort of the capabilities that we are putting together to really making these products available through a social pharmaceutical innovation model.
Thank you very much, Rosini. If I weren't chairing this panel, I would stand up and cheer, quite frankly. This is such an amazing. I mean, we first obviously knew about Glybera many years ago when it first came onto the market, and really lived through with the patient community the demise of the product. And I will have to say, I met the last patient to actually get Glybera. He was a German postal worker, and he was offered it for free because he just couldn't come up with a marketing strategy for it. And of course, it just died there. But I think what's happening now, of course, is going to be an improved product. And I love the idea that you're thinking all the way through, right? Not just in terms of the research and development, not just in terms of the manufacturing, but all the way through in terms of accessibility. And I think this is huge. I mean, and certainly an area in which Canada can excel. So thank you so very, very much for that. I'm going to turn now to John. And John, introduce yourself and tell us how you're helping to disrupt the system and what we can look forward to in terms of your arena there.
Sure, happy to, Joanne. So I'm John Bell. I'm a scientist at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute in Ottawa Cancer Center. And I'm also the scientific director of BioCanRx, which is a network of centers of excellence working out of Ottawa. It's a trans-Canadian network. And we've really been motivated to try to bring new therapies to cancer patients specifically. So I'd say you can tell by the color of my hair that I've been doing this for a while. And I think for the first 20 years of my career, there was not a lot of change in outcomes for cancer patients, unfortunately. But about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, there was this real change and understand that immunotherapy, or using your patient's own immune system to attack the cancer, could change outcomes for cancer patients significantly. And this has led to really a revolution in the space. For me, though, what I was disappointed in was recognizing that although Canadian scientists were making contributions to this field, we were not developing these products in Canada. We were not seeing our discoveries really established in Canada and brought to Canadian patients. And this was very frustrating to me. So we formed BioCanRx, as I mentioned, in 2015, with the goal of really bringing basic fundamental science discoveries made by Canadian scientists all the way through to the clinic to test them in Canadian patients. And what was really missing for us, as we all saw from the pandemic, is that we did not have manufacturing capacity in our own country to make our own products and really find ways to make that transition from fundamental science discoveries to treating patients. And so BioCanRx was really designed to fill this void. And so we developed a program and tested a number of different immunotherapeutics. Many have turned out to be really, I think, exceptional and really quite interesting. But one that I might speak a little bit, Durhan, is one which you're going to hear also from Boro, who's been a real leader in this field, is the generation of patient immune cells to attack their own cancer by using an engineering strategy. This is called chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR, T-cell therapy. And what you do is you take and you use in this case, it's a virus, which is a very tame virus. It's not like the COVID virus at all. It's a very nice, gentle virus that we can use to manipulate and put genes into immune cells. And what you do is you harvest immune cells from a patient. You engineer them in the lab, in a test tube, and then you infuse them back in again. And what's been seen in some kinds of leukemias, for instance, is really remarkable outcomes. So patients who really are terminal, have been through the entire grind of all kinds of chemotherapy and radiation therapy, just don't have any other options and are usually going to die. If we treat them with CAR T therapy, a lot of these patients have great responses, and some of them appear to be cured from their disease or have long-term remissions, which is really, really exciting. But we just didn't have this in Canada. So BioCanRx, and basically I think the power of BioCanRx is the people. In our network, we got together, we said we can do this in Canada. And so we set up what's called a point of care manufacturing network, which Boro's been a real champion of, which you'll hear in a minute, and started a system where we could create these chimeric antigen receptor T cells for Canadian patients, wherever they are in Canada, hopefully at the hospital they're going to be treated at. and administer it. And so we've had some really great results in the first 60 patients we've treated. We've done a lot of this work in collaboration with the NRC, as Rossini mentioned, and are continuing to do so. But we've had some great stories come out of that. And one I just really is amazing is a young woman from Toronto, Camille Leahy, who had really an end of life situation, and she's now appears to be completely free of disease and enjoying her life. She's a single mother, so she didn't have any other options for her. And so in the past, we would have had to try to find a way to send those patients to the States to be treated. But now through this network we've created and through this concept of using point of care manufacturing, I think we're bringing important therapies to Canadians at a price that we can potentially afford once we sort of work out some more of the angles in terms of regulatory and so on. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really great ride, and it's been exciting to do this because many cancers are actually rare diseases. They don't happen in that many patients, and so we need to find strategies that are affordable to our healthcare system. And I love what Connor's doing, because I think it makes a lot of sense for Canada. That could really dovetail nicely with our healthcare system.
And I love what you're doing as well, John. This is such amazing news. The same as we say with Rossini. I mean, obviously, CAR T cells are such an important asset, as you say, in terms of cancers, many rare cancers. I will also say, as an aside, I have met the first child that was treated with CAR T cell therapy, obviously through a commercial product. When she was treated, she was 6 years old. I met her when she was 11. She's now 18 years old and getting ready to graduate from high school. Absolutely fabulous when you think about the opportunities. And as you say, to be able to make them more available to Canadian patients, but also to be part of the industry that's producing them. This is something that is such a great opportunity, as you say. So I'm going to turn now to Boral. We've already gotten a little bit of presage of what you might speak about. Boral, just full disclosure, is not a Canadian. He is south of the border, but obviously making huge contributions that we hopefully in Canada will be able to capitalize on. So over to you, Boral.
Yes, thank you very much, Duran, and thanks very much for the invitation to participate in this important session. Boral Dropulic, Executive Director of a nonprofit called Caring Cross. I've been in the field since the late 1980s. I was at the NIH, Johns Hopkins, and then crossed over to the dark side, started companies. And my first company, we were able to actually develop a lentiviral vector, which is now commonly used to generate CAR T and stem cell therapies. We were able to establish their safety, a collaboration with Carl Jun and Bruce Levine at the University of Pennsylvania. After that, I started a second company called Lentigen, and the team there, we were the first group. We actually designed the vector that eventually Novartis took over and it became Kymriah. After that, Lentigen was acquired by Miltenyi because I was very interested in this model of place of care or point of care manufacturing. And at the time, Miltenyi had a device called the Prodigy, which was very useful to try to enable this. So reproducibility, manufacturing of CAR T cells and stem cells at the point of care. I left the Miltenyi organization back in July of last year to start Caring Cross, a nonprofit. And it's an innovative nonprofit in the sense that we run like a biotech company. And our mission is to improve affordability and accessibility of these advanced therapies like CAR T cells and like stem cell. And the way that we do that is a number of different ways. One way is that the team and the advisory board and the board of directors, we're highly technical. We really understand how to produce these products. So we're very focused in our research labs is to reduce the cost of goods, whether it's the vector production, whether it's the CAR T cell production or the ancillary products, reduce the cost of goods. Then, so for example, one way we've done that is to decrease the vector cost. And so we're a nonprofit, and we've recently started a company called Vector Biomed. Vector Biomed is a for-profit company that is now being capitalized, and it's a CDMO that produces vectors for everyone. But in our charter of the company, we started a B corporation. It's not a C corporation. If you're familiar with B corporations, they always have a social impact aspect to it. So the social impact aspect of Vector Biomed is that for our candidates, we get a discount so that we can actually start distributing the vectors around the world to point of care sites at a lower price. So that's part of our ecosystem that we're developing. So we create companies, We work with companies, and we're trying to develop a ecosystem whereby we can overall reduce the cost and the mechanism of distribution of these products. Like John had mentioned, we're very passionate about place of care or point of care manufacturing, because that's truly the way to reduce the cost. If you have a centralized manufacturing model, that really drives up the cost for a number of different reasons. The transport is one of them, but it's also when you have a large facility, you actually drive up the cost because you have to have chain of custody, chain of identity for a multitude of products running through the facility. You have to have multiple layers of oversight, and that really drives up the cost. These facilities are very expensive to maintain, and that drives up the cost of the final product as well. But when you work with hospitals, right, and you work on a place of care model, you can really reduce the cost because you don't need to transport, and there is a limited number of patient products that are treated at any one time. So that's what we're trying to really work on, is decreasing the cost, further innovation of these products. We've got a pipeline of products that we're creating. We're developing CARs against HIV, CARs against oncology, various oncological indications, for genetic diseases as well, just simple gene therapies. We have a very interesting product for sickle cell and beta hemoglobin, for beta thalassemia, that is in our pipeline as well. So again, focused on creating these technologies, incubating them, spinning them into companies where we get investors that understand the importance of doing well and doing good at the same time. They are an increasing number out there, we've found. 5 years ago, if I would have told you to try to start a B corporation and get funding around it, people would have laughed. It would have been very difficult. But you find that with COVID and with everything that's going on in the world, there is a more social conscience these days and a more reception to these kind of models, and the importance that we do the right thing, not only make a profit. Profit is not so central as it was, say, 5 to 10 years ago, at least on the VC circuit that I was involved with. So that's what we're trying to do as Caring Cross, improve affordability, sustainability of these products by decreasing the cost and decreasing the way that they're distributed, creating innovative products, and working with clinicians and with companies to try to change the tables a little bit on how these products are distributed and provided to patients that need them, and not leave anybody behind, right? That's part of our motto, making sure that everybody can get access to these important and transformative therapies.
Certainly from our point of view, leave no one behind is the driving model, right? So I think what you're all saying is, how do we make these products more available, more accessible, and in part by making them more affordable, but also by developing and delivering them within the systems, which obviously is one thing. I'm so excited by what we're talking about. I feel like I could go in so many different directions in terms of where the questions could go, but let me come back then. I mean, it's one thing obviously to do innovation and to develop these alternative products, and certainly by making them more affordable and by embedding them into the care delivery systems in the hospitals, it's one way of making them more accessible. But let me ask, what are the other barriers that we might have? And I want to stick with Canada. Do we have other barriers? Are there regulatory barriers? Are there barriers from the point of economics beyond the affordability in the hospitals? And how do these kind of stack up then when we look at other innovations that are coming in? And Connor, let me turn to you, because you've kind of introduced the model. How far and you feel this model can extend in terms of accelerating not just R&D but availability?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's something that I've spoken to John and others about when looking at some of the exciting projects that they're developing, and really asking the question, okay, well, what's next, and where are we going to go from here? And one of the things that John's told me is that we really don't have the kinds of institutional models in place in Canada, maybe similar to Caring Cross, that have experience and expertise with bringing products all the way to patient through trial, all the way through notice of compliance, to the point in which they're kind of responsible for those treatments post-market. And so novel kinds of institutional apparatus, similar to Caring Cross, perhaps other kinds of 4B Corps. I mean, I think we really need to think about alternative institutional models that can see some of these products through all the way, that aren't necessarily, purely profit driven. And I think, there's been a lot of discussion and maybe some recent movement around, clinician sponsored submissions to Health Canada for approval. But that's a big one. And I wonder, we see sometimes patients and patient families picking up the torch, crowdfunding, bringing different researchers together, but this should not fall on the hands of patients and families. And I think the work that Karen Cross is doing is amazing. And I wonder if we can institutionalize that, at the Canadian level. Can we create some sort of institution for non-commercial submissions that help non-sponsored submissions kind of navigate the entire life cycle, to do the kinds of things that that Karen Cross is potentially doing. But that's that if it's institutionalized, then it's sustainable. It's going to be there, and it creates a system for not one-offs, but for the future research to be guided through. And so I think, for me, that's certainly a big one, but there's lots of other challenges in this area. I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, Connor, may I just comment on that? I mean, we're not located just solely in the US. We're working with partners in Latin America, in China, in India. So we're not just located in the US. So we're more than happy to collaborate and transfer what we know and learn, and to help move the needle forward, because we are a nonprofit.
So let me ask others, because one of the things you're indicating there, Burl, is, of course, there is a global community that you're serving. Are we talking about, and let me ask Rossini and John, are we talking about potentially developing therapies, platforms that actually could have some global uptake? Are we thinking of, it's one thing to say, okay, we'll make it so that it's more affordable and accessible within the Canadian system. But I worry, based a bit on what Connor and Burl was talking about, if we're just thinking of serving the Canadian, community, that might be enough in terms of sustainability. Should we be thinking about how do we export some of these developments? How do we create similar kinds of, platforms, opportunities in other countries? Is that a place we want to go? Or do we go sideways? Do we say, here's what we're doing now in terms of these viral vectors? Are there other kinds of platforms that we should be looking at? Are there other kinds of things beyond the CAR Ts that we're doing now? Are there other things that could be thought about in that similar way that would allow us to expand what we're doing, but also improve the sustainability of it, even if we're saying we're not looking for profit, but we do need to generate revenues in order to have sustainability? I'm looking at you, Cindy, so I'm going to pivot over to you if you don't mind.
Yes. So this is a discussion that we've been having a lot within the Cell and Gene Therapy Challenge program. I talked about gene therapy, but we are also very much involved in developing these novel CAR T therapies. And BioCanRx has been a great collaborator, funder of our preclinical work, as well as enabling progressing some of these into clinical trials. So we have one that we hope to get into clinical trials next year. So what is after that? So, we are still working to put that model together. And I really echo what Connor was saying. Some of the issues that we are discussing is, okay, we can make these therapies even within Canada available to patients through clinical trials. What's after that? Who is going to pick it up after that is the big question. Like even as investigator-led trials, even if private investigators put it through for approval through Health Canada, how do we make sure that the provinces take this over and provide it to the patients across Canada? So at the inception of the program, something that we have been talking about, we are still in the process of sort of putting this model together, is could we have this system that we do provide it at this affordable price in Canada, and then we do look at commercializing outside of Canada, but on a price structure that is based on the affordability of the jurisdiction, and then put that whatever that money back into to sustaining the pipeline. So these are discussions that we are definitely having.
So all the way back to the spin model, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about, using that social pharmaceutical innovation platform to really think about how do we make these available. The other thing you said, which I found really important, is how do we get the provinces to buy in? You know, how do we demonstrate to the provinces that we're not asking you to just spend more money? These are investments. There's a huge return on that investment to the patients, to the healthcare system, to society. And I think we need to do some of that economic modeling to show that, you know, by bringing these in and by being able to provide them within your system, you're actually creating jobs, you're creating, you know, other kinds of industry that can be, you know, from manufacturing all the way through, and obviously of benefit to patients and to the healthcare provider. So I think sometimes we do not do a good job in terms of the economic. We need to be able to do that. John, the same question to you. Where do you see going beyond CAR T?
Well, it's a great question, Johan, and I think there's a lot of things that could happen for sure. There's other kinds of immune cell therapy for cancer, for instance, involving what are called TILs, or tumor infiltrating lymphocyte therapy, where you harvest the T cell right from the patient, expand it, and test tube and put it back in again, which I think, you know, very recently has been shown to be one of the most effective treatments for melanoma in a European academic trial. So these are all great, exciting things, but I think, you know, to the points that we made here and Borrow's point, you know, these therapies are just not suitable for large pharma. Large pharma does not have the same agenda we have, and they have a different structure altogether. They're good for molecules, you know, aspirins and very, you know, easy to distribute kinds of therapeutics, but for these, it's not so easy. So we need to have a structure like Caring Cross. I love the concept, a not-for-profit in Canada that would make a lot of sense, and get the provinces to recognize that when they invest in those kinds of things and clinical studies, they're actually helping with patient care. So clinical studies now are a part of patient care, should be considered a part of patient care, in my opinion. And we should get support from the government to support these and allow us to create not-for-profits that will make money to cover their costs and maybe a bit more, but pour it back into research so that new developments can come out and help patients better. So I just think it's a new way of thinking about things. And, you know, with respect to regulatory issues, I have to say Health Canada has been pretty good with us. They've been very open to trying new things with us, and I'm pretty excited about what we can do with regulatory systems. I think more now it's about reimbursement for our treatments and finding ways to make this perpetuate the machine that we started.
One thing that we're focused on at the moment is how do you fund the clinical trials in order to get to approval? Because that's the next step, right? And so the model that we are at the moment making vocal here in the US is, what if the federal government would be willing to take on the cost and support the costs during clinical trials in exchange for a cap on the price of the final approved product? So the idea is that here in the US, actually clinical centers can get reimbursed for the clinical costs under a CAR T Act that's here, but the product costs still cost something. If you can cover the product cost and the clinical costs for a phase 1/2 and a pivotal clinical trial, well, that means a nonprofit can take things all the way. And if a nonprofit like Caring Cross then says, if you can help us there, we'll cap our price at $90,000, right, which is a tremendous saving over $475,000, we'd be happy to do that, right? Because in that way, you're creating a sustainable model, right? And you're working directly with clinical centers on a place of care model. There's not enough time to go into that, but we've worked on all these models extensively, and we have a definite plan here in the US and around the world. And it's going to be different in each country just because of the regulatory slightly different, the reimbursement and payer system is a little bit different in each country. But I think that's kind of that's the kind of partnerships you need to make. In the US, making partnership with the payers. So you go to Payer X and you say, listen, Payer X, help us with the clinical trial cost here, and we'll cap our price for an approved product. That's a bargain, right? When you consider, $500,000 per product. So this is the way you have to sort of think about it, I think.
And if I
Let
may,
me just
I mean,
Connor, let me just take a half a second before you speak to just remind people that we're going to open up for Q&A. So if people want, please put your questions into the chat, or we will also have the opportunity, if you wish, to signal, and we will, turn on your camera and allow you to ask the question. So I really would like to engage, the people that are listening to this to also take part in the conversation. Now over to you, Connor.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to pick up on that, and I think this example or this model is brilliant. But it also speaks to like a reframing, right? It's a different way of thinking about, not just the innovation processes, but like the so-called costs associated with innovation, right? And it's not seeing it as a cost, but as an investment. To not just, a trade-off for future price capping, but an investment on, the further development of the industry, the development of highly qualified personnel, the development of infrastructure. It's an investment in innovation. And I think that kind of reframing is a significant component of moving some of these alternative models forward.
I am very excited about that opportunity. We've had many cases in which patient organizations have actually partnered with researchers to actually develop a product. And then at some point, the organizations have bowed out because they could not get wrapped up into a totally commercial model. So they would be bought out in terms of their share. I wonder if there's an opportunity thinking about spin as a way in which patient organizations can stay involved. And I think that would also not only improve the costing of it, but also allow us to continue to innovate in terms of how do we optimize the delivery of these products. Because as we know, and you were talking about clinical trials, Boral, a lot of these, when we think about the clinical trials, they're going to be not just a clinical trial and then we're done. In many cases, we're talking about ongoing, monitoring, management. We're talking about extensions, once these products are out there in real world use, to collect that information. How do we refine it in terms of how well it's working? Rossini, we know that some of the challenges with like Liberia in the beginning was that they were supposed to put together a program that would allow them to be able to monitor these patients over time. And at that time, when it first came out, not only was the price kind of a shocker, but in fact, there was no system in place to monitor these patients. So, without that, the whole thing fell apart, right? So I think, as we look forward, right, how do we stay involved with those patient communities, with those clinical communities to say there's an opportunity for ongoing investment? And maybe part of it is, in fact, having the patients and the clinicians as genuine partners who get then some of that revenues in order to sustain what they would need to do in order to facilitate that ongoing collection, because clinicians can't do it without the support. The patients are not going to be able to continue to motivate without that support. So I'm just thinking, what you've got here is a whole new way of thinking. What's the collaboration between the user communities and the development communities? Yeah.
And also something that we are doing is, as we develop these novel molecules at NRC, like, so some of these, to design and develop these novel CAR molecules, the novel antigen binding domains that is really the driver of the CAR. Those are that's the novelty of the CAR, and those are creating novel intellectual property for the Canadian government, the NRC. So as we enter into some of these public-private partnerships, our business development team has come up with very clever language in our licensing agreements that sort of encourages these Canadian companies to then develop these therapies, do clinical trials in Canada, and go through the approval, but that the royalty payment plan is designed in such a way that if they remain in Canada and they provide the therapy to Canadians, then there is a price advantage to them to do that. So that encourages them to not sell out south of the border or somewhere, but do go all the way and make these therapies available to Canadian at a reasonable price.
Yeah, one of the reasons I started a nonprofit rather than a for-profit, which I've done many times in the past, is exactly to protect against that buyout. Because once you have investors, they will eventually take over, and then you'll lose control of the technology. By having a nonprofit and spinning out for-profits from that, right, that are very specific in terms of their goals, and and making these strong agreements that we can get, say, discount pricing for our products. We create an ecosystem that is sustainable from the nonprofit point of view, and yet we don't need to own these companies that we create. But as long as the agreements are in place, that we can get what we need in terms of discount pricing, that serves the overall goal. So in every one of these situations, we're not worried about ownership. We want to make them profitable for the investors. But at the same time, we want to have strong agreements in place that for these pieces, for affordability and access, we retain. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, we are not making profit at all. We are a federal institute, but this is making sure that Canadians have these therapies available at an accessible cost.
But I think the word profit may be a bit misleading, right? Because what you're looking for, and what you said already, Rossini and Boro as well, is that you're looking for, revenues that would allow for not only sustaining it, but also be able to invest, as John said, in new products, in new innovations, in new developments, right? And if that's not built into the model, then it's a dead end. So we invest in it, we build all this thing, it's great, and we say, okay, that's done, we'll shut the doors on that lamp, as opposed to where do we go next with this? I wonder, and I put this out there, I wonder if, and maybe Boro or others can respond to this, is this a way of setting some new benchmarks in terms of what should be the price for a cell and gene therapy, for an alternative, for an advanced therapy? I mean, right now we know that, when products come to market, it isn't based on deep science. It isn't based on deep economic modeling. It's kind of based on what is the pricing there, what's the guess in terms of what the market is willing to pay. Is this a way of creating some other benchmarks for what should be or what is an affordable pricing for these therapies?
Well, maybe I'll just jump in quick to hand it is we already have those benchmarks because we already do bone marrow transplantation across this country. And it's not a commercialized procedure. It's done in the hospital. It's done, by people who trained in the GMP aspects of bone marrow transplantation. And that's not anywhere close to the cost of some of the therapies we're talking about. And it really is very, very similar. There's a slightly extra twist to it when you do CAR T therapy, but not a lot. And when you do TIL therapy, very similar. So we know already that these things can be done for a much lower price. Our bone marrow transplant, I think all in is probably, $40,000 to be treated in Canada. But, that's a far cry from $500,000 to get the product. So I think we already know that this can be done. And we just need to find the right mechanism for doing it.
Yeah, John is quite right. It really doesn't cost that much, although the price point probably is a little bit higher than $40,000. Probably your costs are somewhere in there. And like Duran said, you have to make some profit in order to sustain and drive future innovation and sustainability. But it still can be can be affordable. I mean, I think for a CAR T, if you're in that $90,000 range, that's not too much more expensive than a year worth of some very sophisticated, oncology drugs. So I think it's well within the range.
I would love to see some of this. I'm going down to Brazil later in November to help open up the cost of those rarities. But really what we're hoping to do is to help launch a rare disease hospital in Sao Paulo, where the government has donated the land. A lot of money is being contributed to build it. But I think this could be such an exciting program because they want to develop a research component as well. So I think it would be so exciting to take some of these initiatives, and to be able to transport them into that environment. And as we all know, I also head up the Rare Disease International, and I head up the Asia Pacific Alliance of Rare Disease Organizations. We do these talks on cell and gene therapies. And I can tell you the question we always get is, and when do we get them? How do we get them? And I think we need to be able to start to talk about, we're developing these, but they can't just be for rich patients in rich countries. How do we make them accessible where they may do actually even more good because there isn't anything else in many of these countries? So I'm very excited about this as an option. I mean, I'll come back to saying, I know we've only got a few more minutes left, is I just want to thank all of you for what you're contributing. You know, we're pushing forward on the Canada's rare disease drug strategy. And we have been pushing the federal government. And I say this out loud because I've said it to them, you know, behind closed doors over and over again. We do not want the investment that's coming out of the federal government, $500 million a year, to go to buy drugs. We want to invest it in the system. I want to invest in infrastructure. I want to invest in diagnosis. I want to invest in centers of excellence, but we also want to invest in research. We need to have research in Canada that is doing exactly what you're talking about, finding where are the places that we can be, you know, contributing to looking for innovations in research and development. Where are the ways in which we can make these therapies available, and not just to Canada, but across the globe? You know, I'm very sensitive to the fact that, you know, as much as we bemoan it and the access here in Canada, we're still hugely fortunate, right? Relative to many of the low and middle income countries. And I know you've talked to this, Connor. You know, how do we take what we're doing here and actually able to benefit not only our Canadian patients, but what can we do to contribute globally? I'm going to close by giving each one of you maybe a minute or so. I think we only have about that, or maybe 45 seconds. Your last thoughts in terms of spin, what we've talked about today, and where do you think we should be going next? A recommendation, if you were to go back to the feds and say, here's what we need. I'm going to start back with you, Connor, since you kicked this off.
Sure, thanks. I'll keep it very quick, and I'll just pop also our project's website. Excuse me, sorry. I'll also pop our project's website into the chat. But I think the big thing that we're seeing here is, I mean, as John pointed to, the transformations in the science and the technologies have been revolutionary over the past, 10 to 15 years. Things that were once a vision are becoming reality. The questions now are, how do we move those breakthroughs into clinics and into clinical practices? The science seems to be the easy part now. The institutional navigations, the kinds of business models, the multi-sectoral partnerships, these are the things. It's the politics of science. It's the sociology of science that are proving to be the challenges, which is maybe surprising. And so I think just the importance of taking a multidisciplinary approach to bring different sets of stakeholders together, I think is really going to be important. I mean, that ranges from end users, patient representatives such as yourself, Durhan, all the way through to health economists, clinicians, clinical researchors, and the rest of it. So I think this and I think this panel is an example of that.
Wonderful. Boro, I'm going to jump to you as our American so I can finish up with our Canadians.
Yeah, no problems. I'll just say one word: developing a global collaborative ecosystem that involves not only R&D, but manufacturing and distribution. I think on the clinical side, on the nonprofit side, on the government side, and even in some of the industry side as well, I think there are tremendous opportunities to do that. I just think we have to have the will and be open to collaboration, open to working together. I'll leave it at that.
Collaboration is such a key point, and thank you for collaborating. We're seeing
I really echo what Boro said, and I think in addition to really having good conversation, good collaboration between the researchers, the clinicians, the regulators, and the government bodies and other private bodies that provide the funding. And right now we have funding for research, different, they're sort of in silos, but come together and make sure that there's good funding all the way from preclinical, discovery to clinical de-risking and beyond.
Thank you. And John, I'll leave it to you.
Well, I think we often hear that Canadian scientists punch above their weight in fundamental discovery. And the reason they've done that is we've had consistent funding for fundamental research. We need to have consistent funding for this kind of research as well, because it's clear These innovations are groundbreaking. They're changing people's lives, but we can't do it unless we have continuous, this is my message to the government, continuous support. And, maybe through a mechanism like Boro suggested, where, clinical trials become a part of the healthcare system in return for, more affordable pricing. Things like this, we should be creative out of the box and come up with new ways to make this happen, because now's the time for us to really have a chance to benefit from these tremendous discoveries.
What a great conversation, what great contributions. I would just say very quickly, as I was so excited when I first heard from Stephanie about this panel and heard, and we had some pre-discussions, that we invited the entire panel to be reproduced, or at least in some parts of it, at the court conferences coming up on the rare disease drug strategy. This is such an important way for us to expand what we're able to do in Canada, and also expand what the availability of new therapies to Canadians. So I'm so very excited, very pleased to have been able to have the opportunity to do this. Huge thanks to CSPC for allowing us to have this panel. You'll see in the notes there are some links to the rest of the conference. And each and every one of you on this panel know that the patient community wants to work with you and is really keen to reach out to you. And I personally am going to reach out to each and every one of you to come and contribute more for us, and for us to be able to collaborate together. So thank you again very, very much. Quick panel, there's a quick feedback here, which we would encourage you to fill out. I don't think the panel is allowed to do the feedback.